Hey guys, Victor here, coming at you with another deck profile, and for today's video we're going to be finally doing an updated Tearlaments deck. Now, when it comes to the Tearlaments themselves, I'm going to be real with you, it's pretty rough if you want to be a tier player in this current format, just because there are so many things that could go wrong when you're trying to play this deck, and it's completely out of your control, right? As we have a deck that enjoys main decking Shifter, we have another deck that enjoys playing Dweller. Bystials are pretty much in every single deck, at least with like a 1 Magnamhut, 1 Druiswurm line, and all these things just severely like cripple us. But even so, we're going to persevere and continue to try to play the deck that we all really enjoy. So with that out of the way, let's jump straight into it. As always, we're going to be starting off with the monster lineup first, and we're of course going to be focusing on the tier portion first, just because it doesn't really change all that much from deck to deck. So as a result, we're going to be playing 3 Tearlaments Reinoheart. You know, on normal or special, it sends any tier monster to the graveyard. 3 Tearlaments Kashtira to mill 3 cards during our turn and our opponent's turn, as well as 2 more if it's sent to the graveyard by card effect. And then 1 of each of the main tier names being the Scheiren, the Merrli, and the Havnis. Really straightforward stuff. We basically just max out on all the ones that are available to us, and it works out pretty well. And that's it for the tier portion. Then for the cards that we are using to help the deck, we're going to be playing 3 Imsety Glory of Horus. So that does mean that we are going to be relying on cards like Zombie Vampire just to be able to help us mill more cards from our deck. But even without Zombie Vampire, for like crackback turns on turns 2 and 3 or whatever, this engine is still just really good at just helping you put pressure on your opponent, right? As long as you have King Sarcophagus on your side of the field, you're able to bring these cards back for free once per turn. And the effects of like the Imsety and the Hapi to a lesser extent, while they don't really matter too much, they can put your opponent into some pretty awkward situations that they aren't going to be able to break out of all that easily. So yeah, just this engine really does help out a lot, right? So just putting pressure on your opponent, helping you advance your game state with the use of Zombie Vampire, and even like Imsety being a dark monster allows us to shuffle it back and then have access to Mudragon, which gives us access to like Toadally Awesome and Bahamut Shark. So yeah, really enjoy it right now. Then for the other cards we are going to be playing, we're playing 1 Bystial Magnamhut with 3 Bystial Druiswurm. So I thought about it long and hard, and I wasn't really sure if I wanted to include the Bystials into the main deck, but I feel like in the current format you just kind of have to, because otherwise you just completely open yourself up to losing to cards like the Fiendsmith engine, and that's just something that I'd really much rather avoid as much as possible, just because that engine is quite literally everywhere. So from there, it pretty much became, do I want to completely devote my deck to the Bystial stuff? So that means like a 3 Lebellion, the Baldric, Saronir, and the Branded Regained. Or do I just want like a very solid Bystial engine to help me push through like these boards a little bit more easily? And this is basically what I settled on, right? So we're doing the 1 Magnamhut and the 3 Druiswurm, just because the Druiswurm by itself kind of does free up the matchup with Raziel to an extent, right? As you just activate your Druiswurm, you banish something from the graveyard. If it's like the Fiendsmith version, I enjoy banishing Engraver, even though that's not always correct, but I just enjoy doing that, so that way we don't get punished by Chaos Angel. Or if you're playing like it's against a pure version, half their monsters are lights, and then you could also just hit like the aggregator that they're going to send to the graveyard at some point. And just by summoning this, right, you're always going to be threatening something like Detonator, as you're going to force them to put it to defense. And it's very easy to basically break an opponent's board if they're playing Raziel, just because of Druiswurm. So yeah, I really enjoy the engine for what it's able to do. And then also, they all happen to be dark, so much like with the Imsety, we can shuffle them back into the deck to fusion summon. So yeah, 1 Magnamhut, 3 Druiswurm. I don't feel like I need any more, but I can always change my mind. And then for the other 3 ofs, we're playing 3 Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. This is literally just here so that we don't lose to any of the Charmies, especially Fulos, because this deck does go through his extra a lot. So even though I don't really enjoy playing cards like this in the main deck, I feel like you could just kind of have to at this point because of the existence of the Mole Charmies. Then we're also playing 2 Beastking of the Swamps. So they're water, level 4, which means that you can use them to summon out your Bahamut Shark a little bit more easily, but the main utility comes from being able to have access to cards like Rukolos, where even though we're not going to be able to summon Rukolos as consistently as possible because of the existence of the Bystials in the main deck, it is still pretty important at helping us basically have protection against cards like Nibiru And even if it's not against like Nibiru, right? Every single deck special summons a lot currently. And take, for example, Malice, right? So they can go activate Dormouse or activate Goldsark, banish a Malice monster, and then you negate it with the Rukolos. And because you don't destroy it, the Rukolos doesn't have to send itself to the graveyard, so it still has that built-in protection, and things just really do snowball pretty quickly and out of control for your opponent. So I still really enjoy showcasing the two Beastking of the Swamps, and then for the final monster, we need some kind of shuffler, at least for like safety reasons. So the one Mudora, even though they're not that great because Malice, like I said earlier, is a deck that can play Shifter, or I might not have said that earlier, but I may have inferred it. So something like Mudora isn't always the greatest, and even against like Raziel, right? They don't rely on the graveyard too much, but it can help in certain situations, especially when they're playing the Fiendsmith cards. But you don't want to brick on these too heavily, which is why I don't play Sword. It's in the side for when you're for sure going to be able to go first, and you're for sure going to be playing against a graveyard deck. But who knows in the future going forward, right? There are a lot of decks that do rely on the graveyard heavily, such as like Fire King or like Mermill, where a well-timed shuffler can just sometimes ruin their day. So with that, that's the monster lineup, and now we can finally move on to the spell and trap portion. Now that we're on the spell and trap portion of the video, we're of course going to be starting with 3 Primeval Planet Perlereino, as it's quite literally one of the most important cards to open up in your deck, as on activation it searches out any of your tier monsters, so it just gets your entire engine going. When a tier monster gets shuffled back, it pops cards, and as if that wasn't already enough, it boosts all your tier monsters and your fusions by 500 attack. Just the amount of like power that this card generates on a successful activation is just unmatched. So yeah, 3 planets, gotta play them. And to go with our 3 planets, we're playing 3 Tearlaments Scream, which is another fantastic card for helping us mill during our turn and our opponent's turn, as long as you control a face-up tier monster, if a monster is normal or special summon, you get to mill 3 cards from the top of your deck. And for some reason, that also allows you to lower the attack of all your opponent's monsters by 500 attack. So you know, just being able to mill during both players' turns, lowering the monsters, the attack of your opponents, and as if that wasn't already enough, it also allows you to search out any of your tier traps from your deck to your hand when it's sent to the graveyard by card effect. So yeah, this card, along with our Primeval Planet, I definitely feel like you got to play 3 of it if you're playing pure tier. Then for the 2 ofs, we're playing the 2 King Sarcophagus to go with our Horus engine, as this is basically the card that allows those cards to actually, you know, function. So if you want to play the Horus engine, you got to play the 2 King Sarks. And for the other 2 of, we're playing 2 Triple Tactics Talent in the main deck again. I just feel with the way that the format is shaping up, especially because of how heavy the Bystial engine is in most decks, you pretty much just need this card just to be able to somewhat play, right? As the moment you get hit by any kind of hand trap, this card becomes live for the most part, and then from there you can just rip out a card from your opponent's hand that happens to be pretty important, right? Whether it's a nib, a Bystial, another hand trap, and whatever it is that hampers you the most, you just get rid of that, and then you're pretty much going to be on like smooth sailing from here on out. But the other effects are also very phenomenal as well, right? Especially at helping you break boards, whether it's drawing cards or stealing your opponent's monster. All 3 effects that this card has are very, very good. Then for the 1-ofs, we're playing the 1-of Tearlaments Grief, as it's basically emergency teleport / foolish burial combined into 1, as you can either reborn a tier monster or a special set of tier monster from your deck, and then you send something with the same type or attribute. We're playing the 1 Foolish Burial and the 1 Foolish Burial Goods to be able to just help our engine out a little bit more. And then for the final 1-of spell, we're playing the 1 Called by the Grave to maybe save ourselves from Shifter. Probably not, but you gotta hope. And then that's it for the spells, and then for the traps, just the 2 Sulliek and the 1 Trivikarma. I never feel like you need more than that. Meta Noise, it's fine, but I prefer it in the side for when I can guarantee that I'm going first, even though the graveyard effect is pretty useful, right? As when it's sent to the graveyard, you're able to add back a tier from your graveyard, and that's great, especially in the case of like cards like Tearlaments Kashtira, as you can use that during your turn and then your opponent's turn, or if you've already milled like a tier fusion that, or if you've milled a tier fusion name that you've already used to fusion summon with, adding those cards back to hand and then trying to get them to like reset does come up somewhat. As for the other ones, Tearlaments Crime, it's okay, but it's very much like a side deck card that I feel like you only really want to play when you go first as well. But yeah, with that, that's the main deck. 40 cards like always, and now we can finally move on to the extra deck. now that we're on the extra deck portion of the video, we're going to be starting off with the Exceed monsters first, and as a result, we're playing the one Totally Awesome, which is one of the few Omni Negates that this deck has available to it, and by few, I mean the only one, and it's still very easy to summon, right? As we play plenty level 4 water monsters to be able to have access to Bahamut Shark in the form of Reinoheart, Beastking of the Swamps, and Mudragon of the Swamp, which are all pretty easily accessible for the most part. And that's literally all this is for, right? You make the Bahamut, and then you make the Toad, and then from there, you can either link off the Bahamut Shark into like something else, or you can keep it on the field to potentially reuse the Toad on the next turn, but that option doesn't really come up all that often. It's typically going to be linked off once the Toad has been summoned. Then after that, we're playing a bunch of good rank 4s, being the Time Thief Redoer, which is just great at helping you take your opponent's resources, and then the best application for Redoer is that it triggers all your Tearlaments monsters effects, if they're the ones that get detached, right? So very often you would typically make this like a Scheiren, and then you're going to go Redoer effect, detach Scheiren for effect, and then banish the Redoer, and then your Scheiren's effect will activate Diffusion Summon, or you can also do that with Reinoheart as well, but it's typically going to be those two monsters that you use to make this, and yeah, this card, just the amount of like value that it generates is pretty much just unmatched. Then for the other ones, we're playing Abyss Dweller in the extra deck again, finally, and while it's not great against Malice, it does have a lot of applications against the rest of the metagame, as you can see with every Ryziel player pretty much playing this card, right? And it's okay against the Ryziel deck. It's very, very good when you're playing against like the Fiendsmith variant, just because Dweller just completely shuts off that engine, right? But with the rise of rogue decks in the form of like Fire King and Mermail Atlantean, a Dweller just becomes more and more powerful. So having something against those decks that can sometimes be like a pain to deal with is just greatly appreciated. And then for the final rank 4, we're playing one number 62 Garrus, the Timeless. If we're like ever in a really desperate situation and we need to draw, or we need to reborn, then this is the guide to go to, as you just attach your materials and then you get to have any of the effects, right? So you either get to draw 2, discard 1, which is great for helping you get rid of usually like something like a Sulliek or a Trivikarma in your hand that you don't want, or you can detach to reborn a monster from your graveyard, which does come up somewhat. And the final one, where you can like double a monster's attack, probably the least effective of all the effects available on Dugares, but sometimes it also does come up. Very, very rarely, but hey, it happens. And then that's it for the rank 4s, and then we do play the one rank 8, being the Zombie Vampire, just so that we can take advantage of the Horus engine. And after that, we can go to the links. So we're playing the one IP Masquerena, which either goes into the SP Little Knight to banish a card on the field, or the Spright Sprind to Foolish a Tearlaments Merrli from deck to the graveyard, which in turn provides you access with cards like Kaleidoheart, which sometimes you may need, sometimes you don't, but sometimes you do. And then for the only other link that we're playing, I just opted to go with one Underworld Goddess of the Closed World. I'm not really the biggest fan of this card, especially in the current format, but sometimes you just run into a matchup where you have to get rid of something, and this is one of the only reliable outs that you may have. So that's pretty much why I just opted to go with this card specifically, but there were other choices that I thought about, such as like the Dark Charmer Gloomy, Nightmare Phoenix, things of that nature that can just help you clear boards, or take your opponent's monsters to be able to potentially link climb higher, or just like have more pressure on your opponent or whatever. But I ultimately just decided to have this to be able to try and break their opponent's boards a little bit more easily. And then for the fusions, we got the Mudragon of the Swamp, the Garura Wings of Resonant Life, and Predaplant Dragostapelia, all cards that I do make pretty frequently, as they're very easy targets to be able to be made with your tier monsters, especially Mudragon of the Swamp. And then once the Mudragon of the Swamp hits the field, you basically have an infinite loop where you can put back the Mudragon of the Swamp, make the Predaplant Dragostapelia, and then once the Dragostapelia goes to the grave, you put back the Dragostapelia and you bring out the Mudragon of the Swamp. So ideally, you never deck out, but we all know that's not always the case. Then for the final monsters, we're playing the one Rukulos to be able to negate special summons, and the Kaleidoheart to be able to bounce and then potentially Foolish our cards. And with that, that's the Tearlaments deck profile. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time. See ya!